Welcome back to Philosophy Roulette. This is episode 35, where I just grab a random philosophy paper off the interwebs and give you my review. I guess it's a reaction channel for that matter. So, I've got some synthwave in the background today. I'm feeling pretty good. Let's see what we got. I was doing analysis earlier last few days, so we went back to thought for short articles. Just did the structure of essentialist explanations of necessity. That was kind of fun. I think I tried to find moral illusions before. I don't think it's available. Let's find out real quick. No, not here. Okay, so let's just go back a few issues and just grab a random paper from one of them. And okay. Multi-location and parsimony finds trilemma. Paradoxes and unrestricted quantification. The colonized and wrong colonialism. Hey, haven't done a political in a little bit, and so let's see if this is around. Dagnabbit. Shucks. Kind of want to do a politics one. I haven't done a politics one. Let's see if we can get to a Wietmarschen's webpage, and maybe we can. This was called. Let's go back. This is the colonized and the wrong of colonialism. All right, so let's see if that's here. Yay! Okay. Excellent. Alright. Okay, so if you are in the chat, you can type exclamation point paper and the link will pop back up and you can come here. Actually, let me also throw yeah, well, I'm not, you know what, let me just do this one. There you go. So now you can get the paper. Alrighty then. There we go. So we're up and running, and we're off. In What's Wrong with Colonialism, Leah P. argues that the distinctive wrong of colonialism should be understood as the failure of the colonial relationship to extend equal and reciprocal terms of political association to the colonized. Laura Valentini argues that P's account fails. Her argument targets an ambiguity in P's account of the volata of the colonial relationship. Either P's, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Either P's view is that the members of the colonized group are, as individuals, denied an equal and reciprocal political relationship to the colonizer, or P's view is that the colonized individuals form a collective agent and that it is denied an equal and reciprocal relationship to the colonizer. According to Valentini, both options face insurmountable difficulties. This paper argues that Valentini sets up a false dilemma. The third option is to think of the colonizer as relating to in an unequal and non-reciprocal way to the plurality of people subjected to colonial rule. This view, I argue, avoids Valentini's objections, but it also raises new questions about how we are to understand the distinctive wrong of colonialism. What's wrong with it? P defines colonialism as a practice that involves both the subjugation of one people to another and the political and economic control of a dependent territory or parts of it. P takes colonialism to be a relationship between political collectives. She assumes that we know what the relevant political collectives are, that indigenous societies or tribal groups do count as political collectives, and that individuals, families, members, interest groups, or civil society associations do not. I will use the colonial rule of Java by the Dutch government as a standard example. For the sake of simplicity, I will refer to the colonizer in this relationship as the Dutch, and to the colonized as the Javanese. I wonder why it's the colonizer and not colonizee. Things I will never find out. The P's central claim is that the distinctive wrong of colonialism consists in the failure of the political association established by the colonial relationship to offer terms of equality and reciprocity to the colonized. This wrong has two components. First is that the original creation of the colonial relationship fails to respect the norms of equality and reciprocity that apply to the establishment of political associations. The second component is that the rules and principles governing the colonial relationship, once it is established, fail to reflect the norms of equality and reciprocity that apply to the internal structure of political associations. Of course, colonial relationships are not the only political associations that violate norms of equality and reciprocity. Apartheid and caste societies, for example, and societies that oppress minorities do so as well. The distinctive wrong of colonialism is the territorial manifestation of this generic wrong. Further, P's account does not deny that historically colonialism is associated with a wide range of other wrongs: oppression, murder, genocide, torture, and so on. Wrongs with P's own view capture the most wrong of colonialism. So, I mean, it's just not the political wrongs, it's everything that comes with it, which is mostly how everything is. It's not just the one thing that's bad, it's that everything, it's a whole set of problems. It's a syndrome, a sudden acute respiratory syndrome. So that's usually how things get you. It's not just the COVID-19, it is the syndrome that attacks all your stuff and then makes your body collapse, as is what we are trying to avoid right now. These wrongs, however, are not distinctive of colonialism in the sense that these wrongs can do and occur outside colonial relationships. Sure. P's account aims to specify the distinctive wrong of colonialism in the sense that colonial relationships uniquely and necessarily instantiate this wrong. I mean, it could just be that could colonialism just be the instigator of all the other bad things? It doesn't have to be a unique wrong in itself outside of the other stuff. Could it just be a system of instigating all the other wrongs to your benefit, to the colonizer's benefit? Who knows? We'll find out. What do the ideals of equality and reciprocity require to the establishment and maintenance of a political association between territorially distinct political agents? And P only answers this question explicitly with regard to the establishment of new political associations, and she answers it initially in terms of consent. For an associative offer to be considered effectively equal and reciprocal, the consent of those on the receiving end is required. The relevance of consent is in turn explained in terms of sensitivity to the will of the associating parties. Consent is required because it offers the best available proxy for the consenting agent's will. The P does not discuss what equality and reciprocity require of the internal structure of political associations, but we can imagine this might involve fair terms of economic cooperation and equal participation in political decision-making and the exercise of political power. For ease of exposition, I will speak of P's view as claiming that colonialism is wrong because it involves the subjugation of the colonized. I mean, I'm not much on politics, I don't know much about it, but I mean, fair terms of economic cooperation seems like oxymoron, that there are fair economic cooperation. The whole of capitalism is like to exploit inequalities in the market. So, we'll see. Again, yeah, this is like far beyond anything I've actually ever done any reading on, so do not take my opinions for very much. Valentini's Dilemma. Valentini's Dilemma targets an ambiguity in a P's understanding of the word "the colonized." On the aggregative interpretation, we should understand "the colonized" to refer to each of the members of the colonized group individually. On the corporate interpretation, the colonized refers to a collective agent. Okay, so each member of the group, yeah, so we've got the particular or the whole thing, and okay. On either interpretation, Valentini argues the account fails. I should note at the outset that Valentini's discussion targets P's account consented condition, I will reformulate her argument in terms of subjugation. According to the aggregative interpretation, colonialism is wrong because it involves the subjugation of the individual members of the relevant political collective. Valentini's central objection to the aggregative interpretation is that it overascribes the family of wrongs to which colonialism belongs. She claims first that there are cases which it is not wrong to subjugate particular individuals, for instance when subjugation is necessary to keep the individual from seriously harming others. As a consequence, there could be political associations which subjugate some individuals, but which are nonetheless rightful political associations. Yeah, you throw people in jail, they're subjugated, but, I mean, maybe you had a good reason for throwing them in jail. The aggregative conception, however, considers all such political associations to instantiate the wrong of colonialism, or a non-territorial cousin of this wrong. Furthermore, this overascription is illustrated by existing political associations. No political association succeeds in realizing equal and reciprocal terms with or in tracking the will of each and every member. Of course not. There's lots of people, you're never going to make everyone happy. Unless we are willing to say that the family of wrongs to which colonialism belongs is ubiquitous, exemplified by today's British, Dutch, and Spanish political associations, as well as the colonial powers they once were. The aggregative interpretation fails to identify the distinctive wrongs of colonialism. Yeah, it can't be too specific, and how do you measure for every individual what the equal footing would be? Okay. On the corporate interpretation, colonialism is wrong because it involves the subjugation of a corporate agent constituted by the members of the relevant political collective. Valentini's argument against the corporate interpretation sets up another dilemma. Either the corporate interpretation claims that corporate agents have a moral standing on their own. You should talk to the U.S. government. They seem to think corporations are people standing on their own, and that it wrongs the colonized, understood as a corporate agent to be subjugated by the colonizer. In this case, Api's view is inconsistent with the normative individualism, the idea that the individual beings and not a corporate agent are the ultimate units of moral concern. Or the corporate interpretation claims that the normative significance of this subjugation of corporate agents is explained in terms of the legitimate interests of individual members. In this case, Api's view is consistent with normative individualism, but implausible. Since she claims that colonialism is always wrong, she would be committed to the view that individual members of a political collective always have a legitimate interest in the corporate agent that they constitute being free from subjugation. If the relevant corporate agent is a sufficiently tyrannical regime, however, and the prospective colonizer sufficiently benign, individual members may have a legitimate interest in the colonial takeover and no legitimate interest in the tyrannical regime being free from subjugation. Valentini concludes that on either construal, the corporate interpretation is mistaken. Yeah, so you may not like your current government, and so you may want to rebel. But if you're the target of the colonization is the corporate agent, then it would be anti-colonial. Your act would be anti-colonial, but against your best interest, and so would be bad. Okay. The colonized. Valentini's dilemma is a false dilemma. We are not forced to interpret the colonized as either the individual members of the colonized group, or as the corporate agent they constitute. The third option can be illustrated with a simple example. Suppose you are overlooking a schoolyard with 50 playing children, and those children are allowed, you may say. In saying this, you could mean to ascribe the property of being allowed to some or all of the children individually. Alternatively, you could mean that the children constitute some complex object, a group perhaps, or an ingratitude or chaos, and that it is allowed. These are not, however, our only two options. You could have meant they are allowed, with an italicized they. You could have meant to ascribe the property of being allowed to a plurality of children in the playground. To make this more explicit, consider your statement interpreted as predicating loudness to the children individually. In that case, your statement would be incorrect if none of the children individually is loud. More precisely, the statement those children individually are loud is true if and only if some, many, most, or all the children individually instantiate the property being loud. Your claim that those children are allowed could be true, however, even if none of the children are individually loud. Each child, rather modest in volume, may combine with the others to result in a noisy playground. One way to capture this is to understand your claim as predicating loudness of a complex object, such as a group constituted by the children. The statement, those children under C complex children group are loud, is true if and only if those children constitute a complex object and it is loud. But we could also understand your claim as predicating loudness to the plurality of children in the playground. They are loud without any of them being loud individually and without them constituting a further thing which is loud. A plurality of children can be loud by jointly realizing the conditions of loudness. Those children, plurally, are loud, if and only if the plurality of children in the playground jointly instantiate the property of being loud. Alright, so most of them are loud, or whatever. We now have 3 ways to understand who the colonized are, and so 3 ways to understand the wrong of colonialism. This is best illustrated by using the example of Dutch colonial rule on Java. The first understanding is as follows. The Dutch subjugated the Javanese, and that's got a subscript of capital I, so we'll call that 1 maybe for now. Or no, it looks like an I, because this one here is a C. On this view, the distinctive wrong of colonialism was instantiated if and only if the Dutch subjugated some, many, most, or all the Javanese individually. The second interpretation is the Dutch subjugated the Javanese, that'd be the corporate individual. C is for corporate. The colonial rule of Java exemplified the distinctive wrong of colonialism on this view if and only if Javanese constitute some complex object, a people perhaps, and the Dutch subjugated it. That's a complex object, again, like corporate, I guess. The Dutch subjugated the Javanese plural. On this interpretation, Ap's view is that the Dutch rule of Java instantiated the wrong of colonialism, if and only if the Dutch subjugated the relevant plurality of Javanese people. For this to have been the case, a plurality of Javanese persons must have jointly realized the condition of being subjugated by the Dutch. We can generalize the 3 views beyond the example of the Javanese, so that we arrive at 3 different interpretations of the general wrong of colonialism. The distinctive wrong of colonialism is the subjugation of the colonized I, the colonized C, or the colonized PL. Sorry. The plural interpretation of P's view avoids Valentini's objections. The problem with the aggregative interpretation was that it led to an over-ascription of the family of wrongs to which the wrong of colonialism belongs. Every existing political association subjugates some of its members, and further, it is sometimes permissible to subjugate individuals. Nevertheless, the aggregative view holds that all such political associations instantiate a wrong like the wrong of colonialism. On the plural interpretation, this conclusion would only follow if the subjugation of one or more individual members of a political association suffices for the plurality of the members being jointly subjugated. It is quite implausible, however, that the subjugation of some Swedish individuals by the Swedish state, say, tells the plurality of Swedish people are jointly subjugated by the Swedish state. I mean, welcome to America, where we have definitely stepped on a bunch of minorities, and you could definitely say it was a plurality of those people have had trouble. So in America, if you break it down in a pretty reasonable way, you'd get a plurality of people that have been subjugated here. And other places too. Awesome. This is true more generally. It does not follow from the fact that some of the children in the playground are individually loud that the plurality of children jointly are loud. Of course, this ultimately turns on what it takes for a plurality to jointly instantiate the property of being subjugated. I will return to that issue in section 4. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so there's different ways to break a group of individuals up. The whole group as the corporate thing or complex object. The individuals themselves, and this is slicing it up into pluralities of individuals that can be arbitrarily, well, not arbitrarily, it depends on just being a plurality in that group. And as satisfying the property of being subjugated in this case by the colonizer. Yeah. Alright, so different ways to understand groups. It's important. Okay. Valentini's objection to the corporate interpretation came in the form of a dilemma. The first horn takes the corporate interpretation to claim that the relevant corporate agent is an ultimate unit of moral concern, such that the wrong of the subjugation of the corporate agent is understood independently of the legitimate interests of the individual members of the subjugated group. This, Valentini claims, is incompatible with normative individualism. This part of Valentini's criticism is difficult to respond to because she neither explains nor defends normative individualism. Could the joint subjugation of the plurality of Javanese people be morally significant independently of the legitimate interests of the Javanese persons? Maybe. I will simply register my relative lack of confidence in a negative answer compared to Valentini's. Okay. I mean... Yeah, I mean... Why would a group of them in the corporate interpretation be so different from the plurality? And I guess this is the incredulous stare argument. Yeah, it's like, sure. I mean, you'd have to mount a pretty serious defense of saying why a group of Javanese would have a significantly different moral concern than the individuals taken together. Okay. The second horn construes the corporate interpretation in a normatively individualist terms. The wrong of colonialism is a subjugation of a relevant corporate agent, but the normative significance of such subjugation is in turn explained in terms of the legitimate interests of the individual members. The problem here is that the only available corporate agent may be, for example, a tyrannical and unjust state. The corporate view now has to say that the subjugation of the tyrannical state is wrong because it conflicts with the legitimate interests of the individual members of the political collective. If the political colonizer is sufficiently benevolent, however, the individual members do not have a legitimate interest in the continued subjugated existence of the tyrannical state. The plural interpretation does not lead to these difficulties. Oh, really? Okay, why not? If the Javanese before the Dutch colonial rule were governed by a tyrannical state, the plural interpretation does not say that the wrong of colonialism consists in the subjugation of the tyrannical state. Instead, it holds the wrong of colonialism consists in the plurality of Javanese persons being jointly subjugated. Okay, so that makes some sense. The normatively individualist version of this view says that the wrong of the joint subjugation of the Javanese is explained in terms of the legitimate interests of individual Javanese persons in the plurality of the Javanese being free from subjugation. This view is not committed to the claim that the Javanese individually have a legitimate interest in the tyrannical state being free from subjugation. Indeed, on the plural view, we can consistently hold that the Javanese individually have a legitimate interest in both freedom and the plurality of Javanese people from being jointly subjugated by the Dutch, and in the overthrow of their tyrannical ruler. Valentini's arguments then do not show there to be any problem for the normative individualist version of the plural interpretation. Okay, so looks like if you slice things, this is more one of these, if you slice things up and better, you'd get the right sort of result arguments. You can't go too small, you can't go too big, it's the just right. It's what's that old fairy tale? The Three Bears. Gotta find a way to, yeah. Okay. A plural interpretation of the wrong of colonialism. My aim in this paper is to show that a plural interpretation of the wrong of colonialism can avoid Valentina's dilemma. In doing so, I have not... Okay, so it's towards the end, I guess. Yeah, so I thought that's just it. My aim in this paper is to show that plural interpretation of the wrong of colonialism can avoid Valentina's dilemma. In doing so, I have not provided a complete pluralist theory of the wrong of colonialism. The main test for such a theory is to specify the conditions under which a plurality of persons jointly instantiates the property of being subjugated by a colonial ruler. Which properties would individual Javanese persons and individual Dutch persons need to have? Which relationships would need to exist between Javanese individuals, between Dutch individuals, and between Javanese and Dutch individuals, such that the plurality of the Javanese count as subjugated by the Dutch? My discussion of Valentini's arguments places certain constraints on viable answers. To avoid the overascription of the wrong of colonialism, the pluralist account should not hold that the lack of consent of a single Javanese person suffices for the plurality of Javanese to count as subjugated by the Dutch. That'd be the one, like the token Javanese, be like, nah, it's cool. The same holds for more generally for the realization of ideals of reciprocity and equality. Our account should not hold that a failure to treat a single Javanese person on equal and reciprocal terms suffices for the Javanese to be jointly subjugated. Conversely, to avoid, there's what's it called, like the good minority, like that one person, you might know one of them is good, but you should ignore that person. You have to realize that them collectively is bad. So the excuse on the tyrannical people saying, look, there is no good one of them, that's just fooling you. You have to do it. So this is like the reverse thing. Just because one of them really likes the Dutch, or they treat a few Dutch people okay, I mean, the subjugated people, they treat a few of them all right, does not hold for the plurality of the subjugated community. The same holds for more generally for the realization of ideals of reciprocity and equality. Our account should not hold that the failure to treat single Javanese unequal. Read that already. Conversely, to avoid underascribing the wrong of colonialism, our account should not hold that the plurality of Javanese persons count jointly subjugated only if each and every Javanese individual withholds consent to Dutch rule. Here again, the same. You don't need to get every last one of them. Here again, the same is true for respecting norms of reciprocity and equality more generally. Beyond these constraints, however, my arguments here do not provide an account of the conditions under which a plurality counts as jointly subjugated. In providing such an account, the plural interpretation will have to settle which pluralities would matter when it comes to the wrong of colonialism. I would think that this sort of thing actually depends on like economics and the particulars of how colonialism works, which could be an interesting project in itself, is to understand the particulars of like government rule on pluralities. I will illustrate this issue by adding some historical details to my main example. Before the full colonial rule of the island of Java by the Dutch after 1830, Java was partially subject to colonial rule and partially ruled by the kingdoms of Yogyakarta and Surakarta, each including a number of ethnically and culturally distinct groups. If we assume that the two kingdoms were the only available corporate agents capable of collective political agency, then the corporate interpretation will hold that the wrong of colonialism in this case is the subjugation of the kings of Yogyakarta and Surakarta. The aggregative interpretation will say that the presence of the kingdoms is irrelevant. The wrong of colonialism simply is the subjugation of individual inhabitants of Java regardless of their membership in one or another political organization. The plural interpretation will need an account of the relevant pluralities, which pluralities were subject to Dutch colonial rule on the island of Java. The Yogyakarta subjects and the Surakarta subjects, or the ethnically Japanese, the ethnically Sudanese, and the ethnically Maduris, or perhaps simply the plurality of all the inhabitants of Java. A peace account skips over this question by assuming that we know what the political collectives are. It seems to me, however, that the plural interpretation gives rise precisely to the kind of questions we should be able to answer if we are to understand the distinctive wrong of colonialism. Yeah, because this interpretation does require more specifics than the other ones, because the other ones are just breaking it up. They're not breaking it up, basically. It's either all the people or all of the people. It's all the people individually or just all the people. And then the plurality requires you to make a finer distinction between just every person and then just all of them as a group. So I like that for this reason. The specificity of how the different... because there is no single way to group any... I mean, you can always group a bunch of people together as a whole, but that's always going to be inherently wrong. It's just going to be like racist, something biased, whatever, to at least some of them. There's no like all the people from the United States are one way. That's crazy. It's a huge country. Even like it would break it down smaller. But like if then you look at all the individuals, well, that's mad too, because that just ignores all the differences between individuals in both cases. So this sort of plurality requires you to actually have an understanding of how people organize themselves. And once you understand how people organize themselves, then you're down in the like weeds with how they think about themselves. But then you can also then match up with how the political structures are actually operating, and unfairly or fairly for that matter. I should briefly consider a skeptical response to the aims of this paper. One might accept that pluralities can be loud, say, or heavy, but deny that pluralities can jointly instantiate properties as being subjugated by a colonial ruler. Consequently, the plural account of the wrong colonialism might avoid Valentinas Dilemma, but it would nonetheless be a non-starter. Yeah. We should keep in mind here that I've used the term subjugation simply to summarize Ippi's account of the wrong of colonialism. Even if it seems that only individuals can be subjugated, we should ask whether pluralities can jointly fail to consent to the establishment of political association, and whether pluralities can jointly fail to relate on equal and reciprocal terms to a colonizing power. I don't see reason for skepticism here. In fact, I believe that existing theories of shared intentionality provide some basis for optimism by providing us with accounts of how people can share intentions and act together without constituting a collective or a corporate agent. According to Bratman, for example, we can share an intention by having the right kind of structure of interlocking intentions, subplans, and beliefs. On Gilbert's view, we can do so by jointly committing to something together, although neither Gilbert nor Bratman explicitly commit themselves to a plural interpretation of shared intention. Their views are quite naturally understood in those terms. A plurality of persons jointly realize the conditions for having a shared intention. They don't each do so, they don't constitute a further agent which does. This is not to say that the kind of pluralities involved in the colonization, the Javanese, say, or the Madurese, would normally satisfy Bratman's or Gilbert's conditions for shared intentionality. Nonetheless, it seems to me that if Gilbert, Bratman, and others are right that pluralities can jointly intend and act, then this provides a basis for optimism that pluralities may jointly consent or fail to consent to rule, and that pluralities may be or fail to be provided with equal and reciprocal terms of political association. Yeah, this is what I mean by on what terms are you actually defining the plurality? We have in this, Western colonialization was written into the way we classify people, the way the way the library system is set up. I know we look at information in a way that it comes down from the 1800s that basically breaks up the world the way it was seen back then, and so the way we conceive of groups actually makes a big difference in how the groups get treated now, and does not properly account for their a lot of minorities' ways of association. So there is a worry that the way these pluralities are understood may fail to actually line up with the political necessities that this account is appealing to. But because I don't know this collective intentionality, but because there is work in this area, the author says, look, it looks like it can be done. But I can see how there might be problems, because we may not even have the right concepts to define the pluralities, because the pluralities are just flat out racist sometimes that we get handed down from our history. So it may not be the correct sort of way of viewing groups of people. But there's no reason to think that we can't fix that either. We should be able to fix it nowadays. Well, one hopes. This paper has been about how we are to understand the colonized, but the central idea of this paper may be of wider significance in moral and political philosophy. My arguments concern the wrong of colonialism in particular, because the exchange between P and Valentini makes vivid why it matters that we need not think of the wronged in either individual or corporate terms. The general idea that pluralities of wronged persons can be wronged may, however, have application beyond the specific case of colonialism. It is not inconceivable, for example, that at least part of the wrong on certain discriminatory acts, certain forms of hate speech, or of genocide is best in terms of plural terms. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was thinking. Like, this way of understanding stuff in terms of pluralities, if it's more adaptable than the old way of talking about this stuff, might be very useful, because the way we classify things is only becoming more and more and more important nowadays with the online algorithms that have been developed generally through these old ways of grouping people and understanding people, and that once we group them that way, then they see certain sorts of information and they do not see other sorts of information, and that just basically shoves people in one way or the other way according to who knows what sort of weird things that were come up with. And they're in no way, shape, or form without moral. These algorithms have moral import and force, because they do stuff to people like this. So this is a nice result of this paper, that showing that understanding the way we break things down makes a nice. It can be of import for colonialism and beyond. Okay, so thank you, author, whoever you are, and that was nice. I'll try to come back in a few minutes, but I'm gonna break stream right now, and we'll see if I can come back and do another one. Okay, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, send me a message, and I'll try to. And also, if you have a suggestion for what else I should read, let me know. Bye. Be safe, people.